Hello. Today I will be featuring the Aoba, the follow-up from the Furutaka, the Tier 6 IJN cruiser. Now, the matchmaking at Tier 6 is most of the time going to be up-tiered. Pretty much constantly up-tiered. There will be rare occasions where you only face Tier 5s, but most of the time your average matchmaking will look something like this. There are times when it will be worse, when you end up against Tier 8s, but most of the time your most common opponent will be Tier 7. Now, I'm a bit unfortunate in the sense that I have a pretty huge fail division on my team. 2 Izokazes and a T22, meaning 2 Tier 4s and a Tier 5. And we're basically up against Eggless and even higher tier DDs. So on the DD front we're already pretty damn far behind, which is obviously going to mean this game is going to become quite challenging. Now the Aoba plays very similarly to the Furutaka. The major difference, however, is that you finally have some decent range. If you get the range upgrade on the Aoba, you get 14.9 kilometers of range, which is something you will desperately need in order to deal with being up tiered. Especially if you end up against tier 8s, you will need it quite desperately. Now, the Oboe Concealment is quite good, 10.3, which is certainly quite competitive. The issue is, of course, when you get games like this, when there's 5 DDs, or well, 5 DDs on the enemy team, it means that most of the time you will be detected regardless. So you have an issue of actually making that concealment work. Unlike the Cleveland, your DPM is also not really that special. On the other hand, you have, of course, this big 203mm guns, which means pretty good alpha, pretty good fire chance, pretty good AP, but lacking in DPM. Oh, Podbonski. You have to lead a lot with these guns. I don't think this is enough lead, and in fact, looking where Michelle's landing, they are landing behind him, so we need to lead even more. Even though he's only 10 km away, the Podbonski is, of course, a very, very fast DD. And but the Aoba shells also have a significant amount of air drag, so they slow down quite a bit. Once I do finally land the hits though, it does a huge chunk of damage, breaks his engine, starts a fire, so ultimately very useful. He damage cons, so that means that fire is actually a permanent one, which means he will struggle to get undetected in any way. He actually shoots, killing the Shiratsuyu. He does get undetected, but I already have my volley in the air. And I do manage to secure the kill. So both teams have lost 3 at this point. The problem, of course, is that my team has lost 3 DDs, which makes life significantly harder because, well, the later in the game it gets, the more valuable those few DDs are. There's the Eggle pops up on the minimap. I instantly turn my guns to try to focus in. The turret traverse is, of course, quite sluggish here. I only have time to shoot my back turrets at him. And the hope right now is that this Izokase can land his torpedoes, but I think he panic launched them too early, and if he doesn't land those torps, he doesn't, well, then he's pretty much lost this fight entirely. This is a very, of course, one-sided fight. The Eggle has almost twice as much HP as he does. He has, what, 9,000 health, so the Eggle has 17k, so this is a very one-sided fight. And that's, of course, because, well, he's in a failed division. And this game absolutely hates failed divisions. It punishes them extremely hard. Most of the time you end up being up tiered by 3 tiers, which means, well, it means what is there. I don't say anything besides well done though, because he could be a new player and he might not know. I gave a sarcastic great job Division A. I mean, there's no point saying anything more than that. I am annoyed because this really messes with our chances to win. But I'm also not really annoyed with the division itself as much with the fact that the game doesn't really warn players just how bad failed divisions are. They don't really tell you when you're making a division, oh, by the way, there's a high chance you will face 2 tiers higher, and there's a high chance you will absolutely mess up your team. So new players, most of the time, they really don't have any idea. And if the guy is playing a tier 4, tier 5, whatever, there's a very high chance he's a new player, so there's not really much point in saying anything else. I'm more annoyed at the game's lack of information than I am with the division itself. Regardless though, the Eggle is spotted. I was hoping to ambush him behind the islands, but the Eggle actually went the other way, so we're gonna see if we can turn around and maybe hunt him down, because All our DDs are dead at this point. We no longer have any DDs left, and the enemy has 2 DDs, which is going to make life extremely difficult because they have all the spotting advantage in the world. It's only 7 minutes into the battle and we're already down this, basically all our scouting at this point. The enemy Eagle does smoke up and start shooting though, so I make use of these excellent 10-kilometer torpedoes. Now, the firing angles are awful. Most of the time you have to give a huge amount of broadside to be able to use them, which is of course very, very dangerous and very risky. But if you do get the opportunity to use them, 4 torps, quite fast, 10-kilometer range, big damage. So in this case, when I see exactly where the Eagle is shooting from the smoke, I will happily drop my torps that way. I'm of course going to close the distance as well, because all the enemy ships have been spotted. So I will be able to sneak up close to the smoke without being detected at all. So my plan is, of course, when the smoke fades, that Eagle is going to be caught right in the open, right next to me. The French smokes also don't last that long, so I'm expecting by the time I close the distance, the smoke will pretty much have faded and I will be able to ambush him. We lose another ship, we're down to a 6 versus 8 at this point. However, my torpedoes are good and I managed to land one doing about 10k damage. And I also know that the Eagle has now used damage con on my flooding. So that means any follow-up damage is going to be painful. The smoke fades as predicted and my opening HE volley does catch him, breaking his engine and starting a fire. So he's going to be crippled trying to flee and he will be on fire. He does, however, pop speed boost, something which I miss. Even with his broken engine, he pops speed boost and evades my volley. If you see that black smoke coming up from the smokestacks, that's a sign of speed boost being utilized. This time I take a slightly larger lead and my aim is better and I do secure the kill. So that's the second DD I've killed. The problem is, in the time it took me to kill those those 2 DDs, pretty much my entire team has evaporated. We are down to 5 ships against, what, 7 at this point, and I am being crossfired. And of course there's the Eagle torps, but I'm not too worried about them since I'm already sailing away and they cannot really reach me as long as I just keep moving, and the torps do run out as predicted. I try to help killing this battleship, but he does go down. The Bretagne is pretty damn far away, so the best target is probably going to be this Normandy on my left. I want to turn towards him, but I also want to be a bit careful if he's aiming. I don't want to make a full turn. If you're spotted, you do not make full turns, and I'm glad I cancelled that turn and started turning out, because that volley could have been quite painful if I kept turning the way I was, although his aim might have been off regardless. Still though, you never want to be turning full broadside in a cruiser if you're spotted, especially to a battleship. That's pretty much asking to be punished. I drop preemptive torps and I keep kiting away, waiting for this ever so slow turret traverse to catch up, so I can maybe get some volleys in on him, but it looks like he's getting behind the islands. I instantly pop my fighter plane, so that if he goes behind the island, I have a chance of getting vision on him with my planes. Since he's fully behind the island, I dodged this Pensacola volley, and now I should be able to turn in and pick the fight with them, because the Normandy is behind the island, completely unable to fire at me anymore, which means the turn that I aborted earlier, where I was giving broadside, is no longer that big of a risk. Keep in mind though that my main focus this entire time is of course the priority target counter, because there's battleships all around me. There's battleships behind me, battleships on my left, and of course this Normandy in front of me. So if I suddenly find myself being targeted by multiple ships, then I have to keep an eye out where the shells might be coming from. Because the Aoba has a significant amount of citadel. If you get broadside in the ship, you are very easy to citadel, and you can get punished quite heavily for these things. I'm trying to keep the island between me and the Normandy, and I'm trying to kite away from the ships behind me, while at the same time chasing this guy. The idea here is of course that you keep the island between me and the enemy so they can't see me, while at the same time dealing as much damage as possible. That is the basic of pretty much all cruiser gameplay. It doesn't really matter what cruiser you're playing. If you are capable of dealing damage from cover, you should absolutely take it. Cruisers have the best DPM in the game. They deal the most amount of damage over time. The thing is though, they need that time, and their weakness is of course large citadel, thin armor, and so forth. So in order to get a chance to deal that damage, using terrain to cover your basically hide is very much worth it. Battleships of course have armor, heal, or usually better protected citadels and so forth, which makes it possible for them to deal this damage in the open. Cruisers, though, most of the time, you want to be staying in cover as much as possible. I mentioned in my Furutaka commentary, the longer a game goes on, the less ships are in the battle, the more valuable a cruiser becomes. And that's kind of what we're also seeing here. There's less people to spot me, less people to shoot me from angles, so I'm able to constantly chase and harass this Normandy, who cannot even see me at this point. And this is kind of my point. You want to live in a cruiser. You want, of course, you want to deal damage the entire time. You want to deal damage from the first second to the very last second, but you also want to do it safely, without taking too many unnecessary risks. I do get briefly spotted, but I am maintaining this island cover between me and him to make it as hard for him as possible to shoot me if he so chooses. I'm getting in between even more islands, and I should be able to block line of sight to the egglet spotting me, and I do, and I'm once again undetected. The Normandy has damage con, so that fire is going to be permanent, which is exactly what I wanted. Not that I'm intentionally sailing behind the island, making it as hard for him as possible to get any sort of return fire on me. We are 4 versus 5. If I do, however, kill this Normandy, we're actually going to be able to claw it back to a 4 versus 4. Our big downside is, of course, still though, we are still missing a DD, whereas the enemy has one. And in fact, the enemy DD is briefly spotted on the minimap. He's rushing our Normandy, who gets apparently caught completely by surprise. So, in the time it took me to finally kill this guy, the enemy DD has also killed one of our battleships. So we're still 3 versus 4. My best bet here is, well, if I try to go south, I risk putting myself in a crossfire. So instead of going where the enemy is the strongest and my team is the weakest, I instead decide to go where my team is the strongest and the enemy is the weakest, which is up north to fight the Pensacola. I'm trying to get my battleship on my right flank to take part in the battle to delay their push into our spawn, because he's still full HP and he's kind of been sitting back just sniping the entire game. He has heals that he should be actively using, which is of course why he should be actively taking damage as well. I catch the Pensacola by surprise, as expected. Get one early citadel. It looks like he's panic grounding when he's trying to turn. He didn't expect me to pop up where I was, so he does in fact panic ground, which means I only get overpens. I am right at his waterline. My aim is good. I shoot. This should be a devastating strike, a killed ship, but not a single shell lands. And that's of course quite annoying because I expected him to die. And that is one of the things. The game is really bad at dealing with grounded targets. It's very common when you shoot someone who is grounded or someone who's stationary, your shells have a propensity of landing either behind him or in front of him, even if your aim is perfectly on point. And that's just basically wargaming coding. There's nothing you can do about it. You see it very often. The more you play, the more you'll see it. People who ground, like a ship grounds, you aim right at him and you shoot, and all your shells land behind him on the island that he grounded on. It makes no sense, and it has something to do with the coding not really dealing well with grounded ships at all. And sadly, I ended up eating like 7k damage there, because he got off a volley that he never should have gotten off. Still though, I decided to pick a fight with the Myoko. I don't want to go fight the battleship down south. I want to get rid of the cruiser first, especially since I have an advantageous position. It's a Myoko though. He has 10 guns to my 6, so he has a huge advantage. But I do get an early fire, and he damage cons it instantly. If you damage con first in a cruiser versus cruiser battle, you give the enemy a huge advantage. In this case, it means I won't even bother switching to AP. I'm gonna stick to HE for the consistent damage, and of course the fact that if I do get a second fire, which my high fire chance is very likely, the fight is pretty much over in my favor. I get the fire I wanted, I launch another volley at him, and I'm just kiting and angling and making sure he can't get any big return damage. At this point I'm only going to use my back turret because I know he's already dead, and I do the best to dodge his incoming volley. And I in fact dodge all his shells and take him down with pretty much no health loss at all. That is the Kraken, secured for me, but we still have huge issues. My battleship didn't go down at all to deal with the enemy. He's just been kind of sitting in the back, sailing away. So I ping him, I ping defend the base, I ping him. He needs to go in first. I will happily push in with him, I will happily scout for him, but he needs to take the initial aggro. Because if I push in alone, trying to deal with the DD and a battleship all alone, I'm gonna die so fast. I only have 13k health. It takes one citadel from the Congo. Like one volley that gets a citadel will probably kill me. So I need this guy to finally man up, finally put that health pool and armor to use, and basically take some of this damage for me. It does appear that he has kind of understood it, and he's somewhat pushing in there. Not as quickly as aggressively as I would like, but at least he's moving in the right direction at this point. I pay special attention to when I get spotted. I'm not spotted yet. Now I'm spotted. Now I have a pretty good idea where the DD is located based on my concealment. Since I'm already spotted, there's no point not to shoot, and I shoot the Congo. Next guns, of course, are going to be aimed at the Egle. I switched to torpedoes briefly. You notice that switch to torps, it was to give me an idea of the speed he's moving at. You can always tell if a DD is accelerating or slowing down just by switching to your torps in between. And in this case I knew he was accelerating to full speed, and that's why I took the lead that I did in that situation. I hit him a couple times, not as much as I would like sadly, but at this range on a fast DD like that, you take what you can get. Especially since the Aoba, of course, doesn't really have that much DPM. It's one of the great weaknesses of the ship is that you ultimately only have 6 guns. So yes, the guns hit fairly hard, yes, the guns have pretty good fire chance, but ultimately it's still only 6 guns. It looks like this guy is stopping, so I launch preemptive torps in case he is stopping. Note that I only turned broadside to launch those torpedoes after I saw that the Congo had fired. Never ever make a turn like that if you don't know the enemy battleship's reload timer. But once he has shot, he's at least got about 25 seconds before he can shoot again, and you can use those 25 seconds to turn and use your torpedoes. Never ever try to do that if you don't know his reload, because all you're doing is basically giving him a perfect citadel shot. I push aggressively to scout the DD for my battleship, because I want to be able to spot the enemy DD so that my battleship knows where the torps are coming from, so he can easily evade them. Basically all he needs to do at this point is angle towards the enemy Egle, and he should dodge the majority of the torpedoes. I shoot as much as I can at the Egle, but at this point I can't hunt him any deeper because I'll be giving broadside to the Congo. So I have to focus this Congo and I have to kill him off. There's only 50 seconds left, but I switch to AP, and at this close range, just like the Furutaka AP, the AP is extremely strong, and that was a 9k AP volley on this guy. He's almost dead. I get my high caliber and my AP volley finishes him off. Sadly, at the exact same moment, even though I aggressively scouted with my plane and spotted this DD, my battleship did in fact not angle towards the torpedoes. He kept sailing in a straight line without any changes in course or speed or anything, and he ate all the torpedoes and he got himself killed. So now we got 20 seconds left, and I'm trying to land shots on this Egle that's moving away. However, the Egle is playing it smart. Every time he sees me shoot, he turns away and dodges, which makes it quite hard to land any shots on him. I'm trying to line them up, but at this range, I don't have the DPM to finish the kill, and unfortunately, this will in fact end in a loss. I did have him cornered, and if I had had maybe 15-20 seconds more, I could probably have killed him, but if and coulda, woulda doesn't count, and sadly, this game ends in a defeat. Still though, 180k damage, 6 kills, high caliber, Confederate, that is of course always satisfying. Only one torpedo hit, but it was on a DD, so I will take it. Looking at the team score, well, I did top the scoreboard. I even beating the enemy team, even though the enemy team won and they had a Kraken player as well. I still beat him XP, which is quite satisfying, especially considering the matchmaking. Amusingly, that fail division of DDs actually had players that defeated my tier 7s. In fact, my Fiji, Colorado, and Shiratsuyu all got less XP than their Izokase player. So, I mean, fail divisions might be a bad thing, but apparently they are not necessarily the worst thing on your team either. I do think this was a pretty good example of an Aoba game though. It showed many of the strengths. You could see the torp, the versatility of the torpedoes against the DD, the concealment in sneaking up and basically repositioning wherever I wanted to, the shell arcs allowing you to lob shells over mountains, the AP strength against the Pensacola, but also the weakness. As soon as I gave it the slightest bit of broadside to the Pensacola, he citadeled me and did 6k damage in return. And of course, well, the weakness, apologies, still got a bit of flu left. And of course the weakness in the DPM when it comes to killing DD is only when you're chasing a DD, you can only shoot 4 guns. And Sometimes that's simply not enough. Still though, for a tier 6 cruiser, the Aoba is still very, very strong, and it's still quite fun to play. However, it does remind me very, very much of the Furutaka, and it feels very similar. Detailed report wise, well, the majority of the damage, I would say HE. 50k pure HE plus another 36k in fires. So HE will be your bread and butter in the ship, which kind of sets the tone for upcoming IJN cruises as well. HE is where your bread and butter damage comes from. However, if you do get the opportunity, both the AP and the torpedoes do have their role, and they can be quite strong. Anyway, let me show you guys my recommended build for this ship. Right, as usual, I will start with the modules. There's not really too much to upgrade on the Aoba. You only have 2 upgrades, and I would go for the range first, because having that default 13.6 km range, especially if you get up-tiered, is going to be a real pain. So get the range upgrade as soon as possible, so you got at least 14.9, which makes life significantly easier. Then follow it up with the hull upgrade. Consumable wise, the same thing. Priority is damage control. You can now slot defensive AA at tier 6. I highly recommend it because, well, the Hydra at this range is very, very short range, and most of the time, well, there's going to be a ton of carriers, and the carriers are quite strong. Especially tier 6, they start getting manual drops, but more importantly, tier 7, you get Saipan and Kaga and issues like that, which can become a huge issue if you don't have any way to defend yourself. And of course, the fighter plane. Upgrade wise, same thing as before, main armaments mod, steering gears, and I think at this point you can slot AA range at tier 6. I think you can get that upgrade at tier 6, so highly recommend that one as well. Captain perks wise, well, tier 6 you don't quite need last stand yet. I still recommend my pretty basic Furutaka build, which is of course priority target, adrenaline rush, demolition expert, working towards concealment expert. Because, well, the Aoba turret traverse isn't really that bad. Ultimately, though, once you start getting to higher tiers, you will eventually want to be getting last stand. Last stand is kind of must-have on Mayoko, Mogami, and Ibuki because they all lose rudder all the time. So ultimately, it's something you will want to work towards at some point. Turret traverses also will probably become almost mandatory on the Mayoko as well. So at this point, you should probably start planning ahead a bit what you want. The most important perk is still Concealment Expert for any cruiser though, so regardless of what path you take, what path you choose to get to Concealment Expert, you have to make sure that you at least get it. A 10-point captain by tier 6 should absolutely be doable quite easily if you've been using the same captain, even if you started a completely new one, and get Concealment Expert ASAP. It's so valuable, and it gives you a pretty comfortable, I think, 10.3 km concealment on the Aoba, which makes life a lot easier. Anyway, the flags are the same as in my Furutaka commentary. Sorry about that, still got some garbage in my throat. But I hope you guys enjoyed the commentary, and I will talk to you guys later.